This is the Fujifilm XH2s. Guess what? Oh shit, it's a Sony card. Look what I'm doing. I'm putting it in the Fujifilm XH2s. Blasphemous. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Iamtongue, and today we got this bad boy in the house, the Fujifilm XH2s. This is the camera that people are waiting for because of all the new tech that it has inside. They're not waiting for this camera specifically, they're just waiting for the tech from this camera to get trickled down to the other smaller Fujifilm bodies out there, such as the X-T5 and the X Pro 4 and etc. This camera does pack a punch, and over the past 2 months, it has grown on me. And I'll be honest with you guys right now, I wasn't the biggest fan of this camera right off the bat. This camera went in a different direction from the typical Fujifilm camera aesthetic. So there were a lot of people criticizing Fujifilm on the way this camera looked and how they don't have enough functions and dials on it. It's not something the core customer base of Fuji really likes. This camera looks like any other camera out on the market right now. It actually looks like a baby version of the GFX100S, and it also looks like a Sony camera. Let's start with the build quality. I love how this camera feels in my hands. I think it's the right size. Some people think it's too big, so it's all preference. There are certain quirks and button placements of this camera that I'm not really a fan of. You got the ISO button right here that is close to the record button. So whenever I'm about to film and I want to adjust my ISO, I'm usually toggling the on and off record button, and this is very annoying. And Fujifilm removed the press feature on this camera where you're allowed to, I guess, the front or the back, you were able to press it. I don't remember which one it was. So if you're coming from an XT3 or an XT4, you're going to be upset at this because that's one of the ways that I switch from ISO to aperture. I press and then I spin the dial and then boom, ISO raised, and pressed it a couple of times again, and it goes back to aperture. We got a rubbery nipple in the back as a joystick right here, and to me, it's a bit sensitive. The slightest touch would send the green box all over the other side, so I hope Fujifilm can fix this in a firmware update because this is also annoying. And speaking of sensitive, we got the Fujifilm fanboys. Just kidding. The shutter button is a bit sensitive as well. I remember owning the XH1, and that was one of the complaints that I had with that camera. And it's very surprising that after 4 years to make an XH2 that they didn't fix this issue because it's still here. And it's something that you're going to have to get used to. You have a lot of buttons on the back of the camera. I find the buttons are too flush. It doesn't have tactile feedback and that responsiveness. But what I like about the Fujifilm XH2s is the EVF. It's incredibly sharp, bright enough to be able to view this outside. And it's one of the best EVF experience that I ever had with a camera. This camera has 2 memory card slots. One is the CF Express Type B, and the second one is an SD card. And we get the same battery that was used in the X-T4 and the Fujifilm GFX100S. And I gotta say, battery life on this camera is incredible. I shot for a few hours, got some portraits and some videos, and never once did I replace the battery. And even though there are insane specs in this camera, it is much more efficient with its battery consumption. I came from the Sony A7 IV and the Fujifilm XS10, and those back LCD screens weren't as bright and weren't as sharp. So this thing right here is brighter and sharper, and it's made reviewing my photos much more enjoyable again. And then we got the side doors and the flaps for your full-size HDMI ports, your microphone jack. And then in the front of the camera, Fujifilm decided to remove the autofocusing toggle. Again, it's another extra step in doing something that was once so easy to do. And this is what I mean by the user experience being a little quirky. This camera has a lot of quirks in it. There's just too many steps to do the things that I do with other cameras in less time. And finally, we got this PASM dial. And I have nothing to say about this dial. It's not the best implementation that Fujifilm did. And then there is the filter mode right here on the PASM dial as well. I find it very peculiar because this is Fujifilm's flagship camera. I don't think this novelty feature should be in a camera of this caliber. But let's move on to the autofocusing. So the autofocusing is great for photography. I must say, as a portrait photographer, I am quite happy with the result. It's a lot stickier than anything Fujifilm has put out before. When I was shooting in bursts at 40 frames per second, I was surprised on how well it did keeping track of the subject. I got Hillary to ride on the scooter right here, and I was happy with the results. This is by far the best autofocusing system Fujifilm has put out. Now, I would say this is almost as good as Sony, and that's all I've ever really wanted from Fujifilm, is just a reliable autofocusing system. Most of my shots nowadays are in focus, and I am satisfied with that. But let's talk about the video autofocusing. Now, I know a bunch of you filmmakers and videographers out there are going to say shit like, I don't use autofocusing, I'm using all manual. There are reasons why people use autofocusing, and you shouldn't be shaming them, or else they'll switch to Sony and stop making videos about Fujifilm and Fujifilm content, such as reviews and Photoshop tutorials and Lightroom tutorials, etc. So stop it, please. Solo wedding filmmakers who are on a gimbal and they need to direct the bride and groom while they focus on their ninja walk will find autofocusing very helpful in this type of scenario. I know it's very specific, but that's the only one I can think of. We got a lot of solo shooters out there that want a reliable autofocusing system. And for video autofocusing, it really boils down to the lenses that you have. The newer lenses Fujifilm released in the past couple of years are fine to use with this camera, but the old ones I think are going to struggle a little bit. It also depends on the video autofocusing settings, so you should dial in certain settings for certain scenarios. It's not a one-stop shop for all lenses across the board. It's a mess, and it's a lot that you're going to have to take in. Because God forbid that I say something like the out-of-the-box user experience on the Fujifilm XH2s is poor, and I get all these fanboys coming in here saying that I need to read the manual. First off, I don't read manuals when I set up my IKEA furnitures. What makes you think I'm going to start reading camera manuals, son? And second, they're going to say at the end of it that it's the user's fault for not reading the manual. And my argument for that is, how hard is it to just get it right from the beginning? Not everyone who buys this camera is going to have a good understanding of this camera right off the bat. And sometimes people don't want to waste their time spending hours of their time testing out different settings for different lenses. Different lenses have different size of glass and motors inside. They all operate differently and focuses differently. So you're going to have to, again, go in and adjust video settings accordingly to each and every single lens. There is no consistency where you can just set one video settings and have all the lenses focus the same. But if you're a filmmaker and a videographer, you have nothing to worry about because you use manual focusing. I do wish Fujifilm had a touch to track an object like Sony's video autofocusing, but it's not a big deal. I can live without it, but it would be nice to have. Overall, my video autofocusing experience can be a bit better. There are times where it still overcompensates, but it's still a big improvement over the Fujifilm X-T4, hands down. For Fujifilm users that never tried Sony or Canon's autofocusing system, this is really, really good. You're going to be very satisfied and really happy with the autofocusing. So I find the image quality on the XH2s for photography, for the most part, looks very similar to the X-T3, the X-T4, the XS10, and so on. The Fuji colors are rich, the dynamic range is excellent, but that's not where the improvement is. I think the improvement here is in the video capabilities. You have all these crazy specs, you have all these video codec that I don't think I'm ever going to use. You got the 6.2K up to 30p, and then you got the 4K up to 120, and it records ProRes internally and can film ProRes RAW and Blackmagic RAW with an external monitor. The 6.2K is awesome. It shoots in open gate, meaning that it uses the full sensor to record, and that sensor is in a 4:3 aspect ratio. What I find this good for is repurposing your footage on a different medium. I will shoot in 6.2K and that will give me flexibility to repurpose my content for TikTok. The 4K 60 is great. There's no crop on it, and when you slow it down, you're getting some crispy, sharp looking footage. The 4K 120 is here. It's also good, but it does suffer from a drop in quality when using this slow-mo feature. We gotta talk about the footage. I think it does look really good. It does look super cinematic. The way that this camera captures footage looks great to me. And I find the dynamic range to be really good on this camera, like really good. And even in high contrast area, like me being inside my apartment where it's shaded and then outside where there's bright sunlight, I find that I can recover a lot of detail from the highlight and shadow area. So that's another thing I love about this camera is its dynamic range for photo and video. It's been really awesome playing with these files and just nerding out on how good this dynamic range thing is. The IBIS is a lot better than the X-T4, but I still find it still fights with you just a little bit. It doesn't know what it wants to do. There is less wobble, I can confirm that in the corners. Hopefully a firmware update could come and fix that issue and make the IBIS look a little bit more natural. Because to me, it still feels like it's fighting with me, but just less than the X-T4. It's so close, it's so close. But overall, I'm quite happy with the way the video looks on the XH2s, and I think in the right hands, this thing can do some serious damage. Not in my hands, not in my hands. The clarity function. Now, this is one of those features that I really like in the Fujifilm camera because I like shooting with recipe. The ones that use the clarity function tend to look cooler than ones that don't, in my opinion. Cooler as in like, you know, cool and hip, not cool as in warm temperature and cool temperature. And while I understand and forgive Fujifilm for saying that with the Fujifilm XS10 and the X-T4, there wasn't enough power in the processor to make the shooting experience faster. That's why when you always shoot, you guys have to wait 1 or 2 seconds for it to process the image. But why is it in this camera? This is the XH2s, and the S variant stands for speed. Why is it that it can shoot 6.2K, 4K 120 and have improved autofocusing tracking, and it can shoot 40 frames per second burst, but yet when we turn on the clarity, it still takes time to process? I don't understand that. So Fuji, I need answers, man, or fix this in an update because I don't think this is acceptable. You're telling me that this camera with all its power and speed, the worst thing that this camera does and that this camera is very slow at is processing an image with the clarity function turned on. I can't accept this. So you let me know what the hell's going on here. Another gripe I have is with the ISO function while I'm filming. Now, I have the settings on Flog 2, so the lowest ISO is 1250. But whenever I'm shooting outside, I find that ISO 1250 with the 180-degree shutter angle to be too bright. So I would want to use a lower ISO, but I cannot with this camera because it's grayed out because I have this setting saved at Flog 2. I just find that very counterintuitive and very restricting. Why can't you allow us to go lower, but just switch us back to Flog 1 automatically? You guys have this similar thing you do with the dynamic range, the DR 100%, the DR 200%, and the DR 400%. When I change ISO, it shows me on the side which dynamic range setting that it's going to switch to. Why can't this be the same on video recording? This just makes so much sense and makes for a better shooting experience. Just have a little indicator that says that you're going to be switched over to Flog 1 and have less dynamic range than before. This would be a less restricting way and better flowing way to film in. I'm gonna compare this to my Sony. I'm sorry guys, I'm sorry. With my Sony A7 IV, if I wanna shoot in S-Log 3, I have to be in ISO 800, right? If I want to go lower, they're not going to gray it out for me. If I want to shoot on ISO 100, for example, they're just going to let me know on the side that switching out of ISO 800 is going to give me less dynamic range. So do that instead, because I do not want to have to go into the menu settings and then switch everything over to Flog 1, and then when I'm done with it, switch it all the way back to Flog 2. Give us that option like you do with DR range settings that you have with the photography side. And continuing on, there are times where I would want to record my footage on a film simulation such as Eterna or Classic Chrome. So there should be like an Flog toggle on and off switch as a custom button setting. So that way, if I'm in one of my custom dial settings, I don't need to dive into my menu system to turn off the Flog recording and then choose my film simulation. Again, this is what I'm talking about when it comes to user experience. I want to be in the menu system a lot less than I am with this camera. And when I'm recording some of the features, I cannot use things such as adjusting white balance while I'm filming. It gets locked out. Also, turning tracking on and off while recording. It needs to be on, and that goes the same for autofocusing. I cannot switch autofocusing while I'm filming footage. So what you're going to have to do is stop recording and then toggle all those things on and off, which again is another waste of time. All these little extra steps do add up. I do wish the green box in video recording is a bit bigger to cover more area. Right now, it just feels too small. So Fujifilm, in an update, just make the center box when we're filming just a little bit bigger so it covers more surface area. Overall, the Fujifilm XH2s is an awesome camera with beastly specs, but with a lot of quirks. Some of the things you do is counterintuitive, and I find it's a waste of time. But it's been growing on me. I'll say that for sure. It's definitely growing on me. What makes me forgive most of its quirkiness is the autofocusing when I shoot portrait. Every time I'm out on a shoot, it works very well, and I'm really happy with the images that I get. There's still some quirkiness in the autofocusing sometimes, but I'll allow it since it gives me more focus shots than missed shots. There are other issues that can be fixed with firmware updates, but how long are we going to have to wait until the update comes around is my question. I love the footage and the image I get from this camera. Like I said, I love the autofocusing, I love the dynamic range, and I love the EVF. And if you're a filmmaker first, you're probably going to love this camera with some of its crazy codecs and insane video specs that comes with this camera. If you're a hybrid shooter, I think the 26 megapixel is great for photography. It's awesome to have, followed by the insane video spec. If you're a stills only type of person, I recommend that you pass on this camera if you don't need that fast autofocusing. I still find the X-T4 capable enough for most of the users' needs. But if you're looking for an upgrade because you got $2,500 laying around and you're coming from the older models like the X-T1, X-T2, X-Pro 1, X-Pro 2, you're going to find this camera leaps and bounds ahead from the previous generation cameras. You're going to get a lot out of the camera, and Fujifilm put a lot of insane specs into this camera. You got 40 frames per second burst, you got 6.2K ProRes internal, 4K 120, improved autofocusing, stack sensor. There's a lot of tech in this camera, and if you're all about wanting the best from Fujifilm, this is the best. If you guys are interested, I'll leave the link to this camera down in the description below. Let me know your thoughts on this camera. Do you guys like this camera or not? And don't forget to follow me on all my socials. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Vero. I'm on Vero now, guys, at Iamtongue. That is it for me, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Once again, my name is Tongue, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you.